Hello and welcome to Building Africa's Prosperity. I'm Chris Bishop. Our topic for today is what we need to do here in Africa to jumpstart energy and power investments in the continent. There's a lot of issues there, public-private partnerships, how we attract outside money into the continent. But in many ways, you could argue that no power on this continent, no business. Now, my guest to discuss this is Victor Eromosele, the CEO of M E Consulting Ltd in Nigeria, and Rockfeler Herisse, the Senior Alliance Advisor at USAID Power Africa, who is based in Ghana. Thank you very much. If I can come to you first, Victor. Just give us a broad brush, if you could, the way this whole power story does fit into business and building for the future in Africa.
Yeah, I mean, once upon a time, Africa was referred to as a dark continent. Call me an incurable optimist, if you will, but I still believe that Africa is no longer that. Africa will be bright. We will light up Africa in a few years, and Africa will be a nice, bright place. Africa will be ultimately a net exporter of power, for example, to Europe. And I do know there are a few projects. There's one connecting Tunisia, Malta, France, and Italy, and you have a cable underneath the Mediterranean, and that power will come from a huge project in Tunisia and Africa. Egypt has one of the largest renewable energy projects in Africa by name the Benban. And there's no doubt in my mind that Africa will be great. And then there are lots of initiatives by different parties. You do have, for example, the African Development Light of Africa. Africa must be responsible for its future. No one else would. But if we are, I'm sure lots of people will piggyback on that. And we have lots of good case study. At least I will share in the course of the discussion, at least one case study from Nigeria. And that can be replicated everywhere. And the other thing for Africa, Africa has more sunshine than any continent in the world. What do we do with our sunshine? We spend most of our time looking downwards instead of looking upwards, where there's so much sunshine. And I think that's this where to go.
Okay, if I go now to Ghana, Mr. Herisse, you're coming from the Power Africa perspective set up by former President Barack Obama in about 2014. I know that it's not always easy to just flick a switch and bring it on, but how is your initiative progressing across the African continent these last 6 years?
Well, we've made major progress in collaboration with private sector partners, host country governments, and the development finance institutions like the Development Banks of South Africa's and the African Development Banks, to really make the necessary change and adjustments that the continent is going to need in order to accomplish what was established by the African Union as the goal to have general universal access by 2030. We've achieved some 10,000 megawatts over the past of years that you mentioned since the launch of the Power Africa initiative. And we feel that the general universal access is indeed attainable, but it's going to take the coordination and the contribution of the private sector, but most assuredly with the political will expressed by the government. And we're starting to see some examples of that expressed political will. If we get that political will to take over and just be adopted broadly throughout the continent, when bring in the private sector to bring in their investments, I think we'll be able to achieve that universal coverage.
Okay, if I go back to Lagos now and speak to you, Victor. I mean, it's a lot easier said than done. And you give me an idea of what needs to be done. In terms of people always saying, oh, you know, we've got the sun here, we've got water, we've got wind, all these raw materials for power production. But how can that be overcome?
Yeah, use what you have to get what you want. Africa needs energy, lots of energy. I mean, I was listening yesterday on television to the newly inaugurated president of the Africa Development Bank, and he was very bullish. He says, Africa is the next China. I share his sentiments, actually. And I do know that there's a lot that can really be done to make Africa look good. It needs to harness. We have water. What are we doing with our water? I mean, in Nigeria, for example, we have one of the Mambela Plateau. It's a big project. Ultimately, after many years, gotten Chinese backers. If they get that project done to generate several hundreds of megawatts of power, wow, there's no doubt about that. We have got sunshine. We have some 14 utility scale projects. If all those 14 utility scale 4 years ago had been undertaken, by now we'll have had 1.1 gigawatt worth of power. So there's a lot that can be done. And then in terms of thermal, people do say that, okay, let's move away from fossil fuel and all that stuff. In Africa, we will not completely move away from fossil fuel, even when you have electric cars everywhere. Why is that? Because we have a lot of resources unharnessed. So African capital, like my friend Rockfeler said, will be required to be able to translate and convert much of this to real power. And there's absolutely no reason why we will not be able to do that. But all we need to get all the parties around the table, private investors, governments, ECAs from different countries, DFIs, and so on. And of course, African Development Bank, USAID, we are Power Africa. You've already done 10 gigawatts. We can do more. We'll probably be looking at 100 gigawatts. For Nigeria alone, we need 30 times more power than we currently have. So that's a huge opportunity. And lots of rurals don't have electricity. Rurals will not have thermal electricity through thermal. What rurals require will be renewable. Have a mini grid in every village, and you'll have power. And it doesn't take a few months to have a mini grid in any village. So if we just spend that and make that, and then but that space, most of the time, they can't fund themselves. And so you will need some charity working closely with the community and finding how you could build them in such a way that it will actually be possible. And SDG 7 is a good driver, which basically says clean, affordable power. And that's what we need.
In particular, you've been working with a hydro power project in Malawi. Just tell us exactly how that works and how it came about.
Well, there's the 350 megawatt Mpatamanga hydropower project. That's a great example of a blended financing activity. Usually, the sponsor of such a project looks for the types of resources needed for feasibility studies. We have our U.S. Trade and Development Agency that works largely in collaboration within the Power Africa as one of the tools that we have available in our toolbox to help advance power projects. So a sponsor in doing projects like this in Malawi, in Kenya, and Zambia, and Ethiopia, and Senegal, they need that type of startup investment from USTDA to do the feasibility study, to do the environmental sustainable impact assessments. These things really help the sponsor mitigate their investment costs in a project. And then you have the issues and need for development, project development. The project development cost sometimes is another prohibitive factor for a sponsor. So we would, in this instance, look to a development bank of South Africa, a European investment bank among our partners to see the extent to which they could contribute to the development of the project, because we need viable, bankable projects that will get to financial close. And then, of course, the sponsor will be willing to take debt. And that debt, they'll carry it throughout maybe the 25 or 30 years that it would take to amortize that loan. And in the process, you have a great combination of public-private partners coming together to achieve a really important goal that would spur economic growth throughout the continent.
And let's talk a little bit more about what's actually happening on the ground in the land of your birth, Victor. I mean, there's this project that's blended private and public money, Azura EDO. Just tell us a little bit about that and how it came to be.
Yeah, Azura EDO IPP is something we're actually proud of. The World Bank is proud of it. Everybody is. They built it on schedule and within the budget, which is what you want for every project. And but it didn't happen by chance. The people actually prepared themselves for it. I've listened to quite a number of presentations from those who run it. Incidentally, the guy who actually drove it was a former investment banker. So obviously, he knew all the people in the space, brought all of them together. And Actis has quite a bit of equity money in it, and they run quite a few other plants everywhere else. And Actis actually did a great job in putting together people like OPIC, people like CDC, KFW, FMO, even the sweet phone IFC, and most importantly, MIGA. And then there was equally a World Bank PLG, which they got. But the most difficult, I guess, for them to get was getting a signed piece of paper from the Nigerian government that if anything goes wrong, we will be able to get some reimbursement. And they finally got that. So which means that they can always generate power and all the risks have been mitigated. But probably the biggest risk relates to gas supply. You need to have, they have a 5-year gas supply agreement. But what is interesting about gas supply is that if you supply at the official price, the gas supplier makes a loss. And if you deliver power at the official price, the power generator makes a loss. So how do you get around that? So they came out with what you call willing buyer, willing seller price. In other words, both parties are whole and they equally benefit from the financing. And the result is that today, Azura EDO has little or no problem. It's just running as it should. But the big question is, this is great. Why don't you replicate this? I mean, they're generating some 450 megawatts of power, which is great. And they want to expand to about 1,500. Why don't you do more of this? The point is that political will government be willing to give such signing? Will you be able to get these 15 financing parties around the table who can do it? And how often can you replicate it? That becomes a challenge.
It's certainly a challenge because we understand that governments are often facing multiple challenges at the same time. And then here we have a perfect example of a natural shock that's happened as a result of the coronavirus 19. So we begin all our engagements in every country with the expressed political will. We speak about the need for coordination and competition, because these are the ways that governments are able to achieve the better economies of scale, the better prices that's available in the market. From that coordination and competition, you have a more willing, a greater willingness from the private investors to come in and provide their ingenuity, their capital, their willingness to stay through a transaction that is absolutely critical in seeing power transactions to happen. We see examples throughout the continent where you have from the Northern Africa individuals, who are, like an Isad Rabab, for example, out of Algeria. Or you go down to South Africa with Nikki Oppenmeyer, for example. You go to Nigeria with Aliko Dangote, for example, or Tony Ilumulu of that same Nigeria. You go to Ethiopia with Sheikh Alamoudi. You have these individuals in Zimbabwe, you have Strive, Mishwewe. You have these individuals who are well capitalized. These are the billionaire club of Africa, men and women who are able to bring in their investments, but they need to have that political will. And the examples that we're seeing in some of these countries is that these individuals need the energy in order for their businesses to thrive. So they're willing to make that investment, but the political will, the regulatory framework, those things must be in place in order to give them the encouragement, the assurances that they will need to invest their capital and be assured that they will be able to see their returns coming back. So these examples about what we're seeing on the continent with regards to the political will, Mr. Eromosele talked about the looking up as opposed to looking down. We know that 40% of the new discoveries of natural gas just recently happened on the continent. We're seeing in Senegal, for example, where USTDA provided in collaboration with the sovereign fund, the government sovereign fund, the creation of a feasibility study that would bring offshore gas from their fields onto an onshore field or linked to the grid. We know that the technologies are available, the technologies are possible. We know that there are private investors who are willing to come into the space. But those individual investors, as well as the DFIs, the development finance institutions, they need to have that environment that is enabled for investment. This is where we talk about the political will, and having those elements in place, you will see a lot of the broad and ambitious pronunciations about the continent really come to life.
There should be big friends for power on this continent. Strive Masiyiwa, Tony Elumelu, people who've got serious capital that they can mobilize towards securing the continent's energy supply. Why do you think that's not happened so far?
I think it's happening, but slowly. Dangote, for example, is doing quite a bit. He was never in oil and gas, and here he is building one of the world's largest refineries. So that can be done. I'm sure I won't be surprised if he's building one of the world's largest power plants. So this can be done. It all depends on the will. I mean, Rockfeller was spot on when he talked about enabling environment. A seed will not grow if you don't give it the right soil. So give it the right soil, it will grow. In terms of do we need it? Yes, we do need it. But do we have the right soil? Who has the can of water? The governments have the can of water. Get these guys the can, wet the soil, and they will grow, and it will. And you will have the projects. And then, of course, we obviously need international support wherever possible. It's always good to have, and that will actually deepen it. But that is just simply the way to go. Getting the right conditions, getting the enabling environment.
Another issue as well that strikes me, surely you alluded there to COVID-19 and the effect that it's had on investment on the continent. Surely post-COVID-19, with all the new risks that we're facing, isn't it going to be a time where deals are going to have to be rewritten to take this into account?
This is why I turn to the daughters and sons of the continent, because there is that sense of that greater interest that is self-developed, self-motivated. No one needs to tell an investor, though Strive may be based in London, but he is still a son of the continent. Nicky Oppenmeyer never left South Africa. So you have these individuals who have that natural understanding and the need for their businesses. The lifeblood of their businesses depends on the energy. So it's a matter of just looking inward and saying, we can do this. You're seeing a lot of momentum with regards to the free trade corridor for Africa. The AFTA Act that passed are all expressions of where the political will is trending. You keep that trend, you bring in the private investment. We help with the blended financing coming from the public sector. You do your public-private partnerships, create these alliances based on an environment that is empowered, enabled, then you'll have that momentum that you need that will just really allow for the continent to leapfrog and a lot of countries to leapfrog and get into the newer technologies that are available in providing affordable and accessible energy throughout the continent.
I put that question to you, Victor, over in Lagos. In terms of technology, I want to talk about that. Seems to be a key issue in this whole discussion. But just before you get there, I mean, Nigeria has a highly educated and highly successful expatriate population living around the world. How likely do you think that the country can attract back some of that accumulated capital to help with problems like power generation?
I think we're already doing that in many spheres. If you go and find out who runs GE in Nigeria, the chances are that is somebody from the diaspora who probably runs GE in Nigeria. If you look at the technology space generally, there's a lot happening in Nigeria in the technology space that's even attracting attention of all the big wigs around the world. And that can equally happen in power. There's no reason why it shouldn't, really. It's just that get the environment right. Once you have the environment right, then we can have blended financing, which is what you need. In other words, everybody plays his strength. I was listening to Dr. Haisha when he was talking about expatriates and leaving, because here we are, a pandemic has just arrived. What do? Local talent. In Nigeria, I think among all the Africans, Nigeria is one of the greatest country pushing local talent, particularly in the oil and gas industry. And that can be done in power and in every sector, in all the technological sector. Once we can push that, what you will find is that there will be developments happening immediately. But a few other things must be right. Getting the price right. In Africa, we love subsidy. In some circles, the word subsidy is becoming obscene. We should start moving away from subsidy. We should be thinking about sustainability, another S word. What is sustainable? Subsidy is not sustainable. So this willing buyer, willing seller is a way of getting around subsidy. So we don't have to have governments fixing price by fiat all the time. What works for you works for me. That's collaboration, cooperation. So it's not just in bringing a financing party. The entire model should be a very workable one. And once you have that, it works. I was CFO of Nigeria LNG for many years. We've just taken, if you've been listening to the news, LNG is having its train 7, and it's going to be adding something like 30% plus of its capacity, new capacity in the next few years. That was in the drawing board for a long time, but it's now out. And I can tell you, on the date they say they would, it will happen. So just replicate that model. There are good models in Africa. It works. And today, Nigeria LNG is Africa's leading exporter of the product. We could be leaders in anything we want, but we just have to have the right models. Or replicate models that work elsewhere, everywhere else. I've helped raise billions of dollars in financing, so I know what I'm talking about. It is doable. It's a no-brainer.
Okay, all right. Well, you mentioned the models. Now, development finance institutions such as the DBSA, they had this so-called RIP program to help get new power generation onto the grid and encourage investment. What further collaborative efforts could be required to improve traction in this area?
Well, I think that that great DBSA model is now sitting on a hill, if you will, as the gold star. The model that I think the rest of the continent needs to come around and bring their resources behind and really take the opportunity for replication. The public-private partnership element is also very critical in that. You'll have that model that comes from a DBSA. You'll need not just a DBSA, but you need other lending institutions to also view it and embrace it, because DBSA alone cannot address this particular challenge, because we have to have this take a real mushroom effect that comes from south to north, east to west, and just have a convergence that will now ultimately lead to a regional market or regional markets that are intertwined, that bring in the right mix of sustainability, as Victor just mentioned, but also an element of returns. No one is going to be investing in these markets for energy without the full understanding that they're going to have the necessary returns back from their investments. We need public-private partnerships. We need the confluence of personal, private investments. We need the institutional investors and large funds that are focused on the climate, for example. The Global Climate Change Fund is one of those examples of where a DBSA is not asked to come at this alone to bring in the necessary investments that are needed to make these projects happen. We also have, I think you brought a very interesting point with regard to the technology that we shouldn't shy away from as part of the conversation. The conversation should also include the fact that we need to adopt this technology that is renewable energy. It's not a given that people are viewing renewable energy as a viable solution for Africa going forward. So when we collaborate and bring in our efforts, we have the DBSAs of the world doing their portion. We have our partnerships and public-private partnerships model coming in to do their thing. We have the private investor. It's a group of private investors in Cote d'Ivoire who's pushing this project. So you have that mix. You need to have the confluence of effort and injection of resources in order to make these things happen.
Well, unfortunately, that's all we've got time for on this fascinating debate. Thank you very much indeed. In Lagos, Victor Eromosele, the CEO of M E Consulting, and also Rockfeler Herisse, the Senior Alliance Advisor at USAID Power Africa, coming to us from Ghana. And that's all we've got time for on this episode of the show. From me, Chris Bishop, for now, it's goodbye.